Hi everybody, welcome to episode 36 of the Teesside Business Podcast. Today we are very lucky to be joined by Victoria. Thanks very much for coming down and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So we'll get started off by if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your career history that led you to starting up your own business.
It is, I'll warn you, it's quite a long story.
No, that's good, they're the best ones.
I'm from this region originally. I actually lived in France for 10 years between 2001 and 2011.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in France, I ran a charity, started up a charity, came back to the UK, did a bit of freelancing. I ended up working in North Yorkshire Library Service for 5 years across, Thirsk Library, Pateley Bridge, Northallerton, Easingwold. I've sort of managed those libraries and the staff and volunteers for that time. After the library restructure, I went to work for the web team at North Yorkshire County Council at County Hall in Northallerton for a year. All my freelancing and things like that has always been digital, web-based and writing, so content writing, but anything digital I've always been able to turn my hand to. And sort of having this entrepreneurial side to me, I think I tend to take things on, start projects. So after the contract ended at County Hall, I thought I want to go back to work for myself again. But how I'd done it in the past, when I first came back to the UK in sort of 2011, 2012, it was very much a sort of freelance, low-level kind of thing. I had a toddler at the time, so it was a kind of part-time sort of thing. And this time I wanted to approach it in a more serious way. So in January, I launched my company, which is called greentreeonline. And I did see it in a way as bringing together some of my skills and strengths and experience from my different sort of backgrounds. I didn't go quite back far enough. I have a PhD in history of art, which I did before I launched my charity in France. I did that. So I'm kind of started off as an academic. So all those things, whether it's writing, research, and those digital skills, I wanted to bring together. And having worked in the public sector for so long, and in libraries, you get used to helping people. Libraries particularly, I mean, it is about books. Yeah. And, it's kind of trendy to say, it's not just books anymore. But libraries are about books, but they're also about helping people who come through the door with literally anything. And you get used, as a librarian, you get used to dealing with absolutely anything. We never say, no, we can't help you. It's always, okay, I'll see what I can do, or I'll find someone who can help. And it's that I sort of took forward into my business. So I knew I didn't want it to be just a standard digital agency, because I've done plenty of social media. I've done websites, so I've worked quite a lot with WordPress, and as a volunteer and as a freelancer over the years. But I didn't want it to be just a standard commercial agency. What I wanted to do was to help people who were excluded by that market, so who couldn't afford the commercial rates, couldn't afford to get a web designer to do their website for them. I wanted to teach people how to use things themselves, how to access those digital tools, sort of almost help them get over the hump, of the learning curve of getting into it in the first place. And also helping things like some really small charities, community groups. I'd been dealing with the volunteer-run libraries after the library restructure in North Yorkshire, and groups like that, new trustees. But they have so much to take on, massive skills sort of learning curve to deal with, and I thought those are the people I want to help. So I started off in January with basically a social enterprise. The idea of being it has to be a business, because I need to pay my mortgage, feed my kids, etc. But I didn't want it to just be a business, so I launched a non-profit company. So it's not a charity or a community interest company. I did look at those structures, but in the end, I got in touch with a specialist accountant, third sector accountancy firm based in Manchester, and he advised me to go with limited company, but no shareholders. Nobody can get rich. He literally said, you can't get rich. That's fine. Not seeking riches. Just I want this to work. So that means that because you can't have shareholders, you can't have investors getting rich. There's nobody sitting behind there earning money. Profits have to go back in. There's nowhere else for them to go. Yep. So that's the idea. The more work we did, the more we'd be able to do.
Yep.
So I'm sort of, it's been a bit of an interesting journey.
I bet.
Starting off at the very beginning, with business planning courses, I went on the Eureka course, Enterprise Made Simple course back in January, and I had a certain idea of how I was going to run it, and inevitably with these things, it doesn't quite end up that way.
No.
And I think I've come to a sort of, it's an interesting point to talk to you, because I've come to a bit of a turning point with the business and what I want to do with it. I'm looking at new directions. And I'm sort of having to rethink some of how I started off as well. Mm-hmm. One of the sort of, there's a complicating factor is I was diagnosed with autism in 2015.
All right, okay.
It was actually on the back of my son getting his diagnosis. Yep. He's 13 now. Mm-hmm. And when he was going through that process, I found a lot of the things that we were talking about with the therapists working with him and the diagnosis process. A lot of that rang true for me, and I started to read up a little bit about it and ended up seeking a diagnosis myself through the GP. Ended up going down to Sheffield specialist adult centre to get, and I did get my diagnosis at age 35, which was a bit of a shock. In some ways, even though I sought the diagnosis, I ended up not thinking, oh my God, oh no, what have I done? Now, what do I do with this? And it did, but so it was, on the one hand, it was a shock, but on the other hand, it explains a lot of difficulties I've had through my life.
Yeah, I can imagine kind of like it lifted a bit of a filter, shall we say, of when you start to look back at other episodes of thinking, actually, these kind of... and I'm not very educated on the space, straight away I'll say. I am aware that... and unless I'm correct, it is like a spectrum, obviously, and stuff like that. And I have met individuals in my life who've got certain things, and they've said to themselves, you know what, if I think I got tested, then I would probably be on the spectrum at some point, at some place. But I can absolutely understand, especially about kind of how things in that space are evolving, how more and more people are probably getting diagnosed later in life. So it must be, I don't know if it would be a relief or it would kind of shine a light on how, did it change how you start to think, right, okay, well, this is how I'm going to start to structure things moving forward then?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. People are often getting diagnosed more and more later in life, especially women, because it doesn't quite present the same way in women. Okay. Just because of whatever differences there are of how we behave and how we're socialised and how people think, I guess. Yes, so it illuminated some challenges that I've always had. Mm-hmm. I mean, I struggled at university, for instance, so that sort of, rather than me thinking, what on earth is wrong with me, I came to thinking, okay, well, there's this thing, I can deal with it, at least I know what, I might be able to expect what challenges they're going to be. So it came in the middle of, I've had some challenges in the workplace as well. But in North Yorkshire, County Council were great in many ways, of course. But workplaces are always going to be a difficult situation. You know, there's social difficulties, and it's, in written form, I'm much better in terms of communication. But especially with a group social situation, I can find it challenging. And those differences start to appear. So one thing, when I started Green Tree Online, my vision for it was going to be partly that it's to look at my own well-being and how I'm going to be best able to work as I go forward. You know, I'm going to be 40 next year. I don't want to carry on for another 20 plus years in a workplace that's unhealthy. You know, this is,
of course.
You spend most of your waking life at work, so it has to be right. And also, I do have a vision for a workplace and a workspace, and sort of almost the physical place of where you work as well. That, you know, autism comes with sensory challenges as well. So things, lighting can be difficult, or noise can be difficult. And so I had what I want to do is make the most of my and other autistic people's strengths. So things like, I mean, digital often comes naturally to us. You know, there's stereotypes, obviously, and the stereotypes are, some of them are true and some of them are not, but often there's a certain way of thinking which is a strength. And certainly for me, I think a certain out of the boxness, which has helped me. I am entrepreneurial.
I was going to say it would lean
Yeah.
itself very much
Yeah.
like, and I suppose when there's challenges of working in organisations, councils, and things like that, the arbiters sometimes can be very. This is the process in which we operate, and there's not very kind of lateral movement on it.
Yep.
Where obviously in a more entrepreneurial space, there's no kind of structure. For a lot of people, I suppose that can be, especially when they're coming to set up like a business or like especially in relations to marketing and digital, that can be really daunting because there is again so much information out there and things like that. So I can completely understand like both sides of the coin. How some people would really struggle with no structure, and some people who struggle within something where they can't even move slightly. So it just makes me just like conversations like this are great, especially for me because I thought of when you mentioned there obviously with one thing that it never occurs to me to check when people are coming in is do you have a sensitivity to light?
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to ask you that I must apologise for is that we have an office dog, and I generally ask everybody, like she's the world's friendliest thing, but she's like a big black dog, so I can imagine like she can take people off kind of guard. So, but for people obviously who don't know him, there's some large lighting that takes place, so we can light it effectively. But it never occurred to me there to think, actually, because there's a lot of people, especially imagine if they were sensitive to it when they got here and like probably very too polite to actually say, actually, this is really going to bother me. And it actually came up in a piece of content we were doing for a client recently, where we were doing video and they said, are you going to turn those lights on? Right. And we were like, yeah, we are. And and the woman at the time, I won't say where it was or anything like that, but she was like, I have an aversion to light, like I can't do it. So it's something like that where it's just another thing where it's making me think forwardly of, you know what, there's no, like, nobody even like has mentioned it like in a HR space or anything like, when you're getting people in, you need to start thinking of these things. So it's
and people tend to think about accessibility and disability and the Equality Act and being wheelchair accessible or whatever, but there are invisible disabilities that it's important to be accessible with as well. And I have been to some meetings where sound wise it has been particularly difficult because I think it tends to manifest itself for me in that I find it very difficult to filter out background sound. Yeah. So if we're in a cafe for a meeting, for instance, I hear absolutely everything, and it's a big wall of sound, and it's very hard to focus on what somebody in front of me is saying. So that's such hard work.
I know, but I can imagine it is though, especially like if you and everybody can, for like say, just inherently, focus on different things, and if you are very kind of auditory and things like that, like a cafe must be a nightmare because you've got a million conversations happening, clattering of plates, dishes, music, like all these things that you don't kind of think about. Like we're quite lucky here that even though we are like on a main street, we're quite well shielded from sound and stuff like that. Sometimes you can hear the girls singing in the deli next door as they're working out the back, but that's about it. So did it ever, as it occurred to you or things like that, of like, is it really cliche to think, well, I'm going to help people who have these types of things like in marketing, or is it a case of I want to help as many people as possible? Because like what you can't describe there, like the point of entry of people who are coming in who've got like, let's say we've got a sliding scale of 1 to 10 and they're at 0 and they've got no idea how to start, but they know they need to. Like it must be so overwhelming to start. Yeah. Like doing that. The same as like if you go to research anything now that you start to get into, all of a sudden you're barraged by so much information you don't know what's correct or not. So is it a case of like after your diagnosis did you start to think, well actually I'm going to start do a bit of a pivot and help these people, or is it I'm going to now just include that in the services that help people, or did it occur to you at all and I've been really insensitive?
No. I mean, to be honest, the way I tend to think about the sort of autism side of things is is from the point of view of the workplace or the workspace. But that was always going to be a longer term project. So I was keen to, for instance, one day employ people on the spectrum or have a sort of neurodiverse friendly is the word workspace physically where it, that was adapted to be as comfortable as possible. And I saw that from the point of view of my service delivery rather than the customers as such, although I can having an understanding of that particular condition, I'm always I always talk about it very openly. So if I would encourage somebody who was struggling to deal with perhaps a training session or mentoring, which was not, autism friendly, then that's something I could offer because I would understand if they had certain needs. But no, the way I conceived of Green Tree Online was from a community point of view. I mean, I started it, the Green Tree and all that is about growing, and I think my original idea for the naming the business was something to do with allotments. I see it as a community and growing sort of metaphor, so it ended up being Green Tree. And my strapline for the business is growing digital communities. So community groups are the people I want to help. First few months of actually finding clients, I mean, I was intending to help charities and community groups to find funding sources, so that, perhaps help them to write a bid where they were unsure of what language to use to explain why do you need a website, why do you need a Twitter, and why to persuade a funder that was worth investing in. As it happens, a lot of if I'd been helping someone write a bid, that would have been pro bono aspect, and then I would only get paid later on in the process, so that's difficult cash flow wise. I ended up getting into charging very little and doing an awful lot of work for very little money, and I've been doing that for months basically from launch in January, and to the point where I've pretty much burnt out after sort of
I can imagine.
And it's naivety in one sense, but it's also being used to the public sector. I'm working in the public sector for 6 years. You are funded to help people, and that's what what is wonderful about councils. We all moan about councils, but there are council services. There are still libraries left, just about, in North Yorkshire, and here in Stockton we have wonderful library service. And that instinct to sort of help anyone who walks through the door, sadly, isn't a commercially viable instinct. And I had a business advisor say to me, it's a tragedy, and not that this is not a good thing, but there's a reason that libraries are struggling in the UK, and it's because it's not a commercial model, and you can't just help people if you want to, if it's going to be financially sustainable. I had a conversation with a lady from the School of Social Entrepreneurs in sort of about 2 months ago, which was sort of the beginning of a little bit of my drawing my line with that kind of work, where she basically said, yes, this work needs to exist. These skills, this sector needs those skills, and I'm talking about the community groups, small charities, but also sort of micro SME startups who are a bit lost, There is a massive need, and she said this isn't going to happen unless it's commercial, and it would be a tragedy. You've got to make it commercial. And I'm looking at now a different business model for this offer, which is sort of looking at getting some commercial work at proper market rates, which I'd just been really cheap up till now, which isn't sustainable. So if I get some proper paying work at the market rates, I can subsidise work for charities at a lower rate. So that's sort of where I started to restructure myself from here on, to make it possible. And happily, the other sort of aspect which where I've been successful with developing a business model is through relationship with funders, and particularly the Good Things Foundation. The Good Things Foundation used to be called the Tinder Foundation until, for obvious reasons, they had to change the name.
I can understand that.
Yeah, that word just doesn't mean the same anymore these days. So the Good Things Foundation funds various. Their sort of raison d'etre is digital inclusion. So they fund digital projects all over the UK. And I started off in March with a contract called Future Digital Inclusion, which is absolute basic computer skills. So it's people who've literally never used a computer or the internet before, or funnily enough, you sometimes get people who are fine with Facebook on their phone but can't use a mouse, And it's quite interesting where those skills gaps are. So I've that was a £5,000 contract for the year to deliver digital skills. So it's enabled me to almost go back to my library roots a little bit. I'm literally delivering that from Loftus Library and Thirsk Community Library, worked a little bit with Middlesbrough Libraries as well. So helping people who, I've worked a little bit with Age UK with their Silver Surfers. I'm going to be doing a little bit more of that in September over Redcar, Cleveland way, and that is funded. Good Things Foundation has started a new partnership with Google. So the Google Digital Garage up in Sunderland that's there for this year, that's a fixed space. And Good Things Foundation started a major partnership with them. And the Google Digital Garage sends a bus around, to, which I don't know if you've spotted.
I've seen the Google bus, yeah.
Yeah, so it was my partnership with the Good Things Foundation. We got the Google bus down to Yarm High Street.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing that about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, it was in end of June.
It was, I remember.
Yeah, so that was me that organised that and got those literal wheels in motion for that. It was an absolute success. It was...
they got such good publicity and like eyes on it and stuff like that, so...
Yeah, I mean, I think... The people from Google were thrilled with the Yarm visit because they actually doubled their footfall for that particular one. And I think because sort of myself having the digital marketing background and instinct, I sort of gave it quite a lot of a push, and it was a real success. And sort of off the back of that, I now have a second contract with the Good Things Foundation, which is funded by a Google org, so Google's community sort of non-profit arm, and it's called, the project's called Everyone Thrives Online. Yeah. So starting from September, I'm going to be doing fully funded digital training. This time it's not never used a mouse before level. Yeah. I'm still doing that until March, but this Everyone Thrives Online is about employability and self-employment. So it's for both job seekers, people in work, and those looking to start a small business or running a small business. So it's anything ranging from using the Google Docs and spreadsheets, making presentations on PowerPoint or Google Slides,. Using LinkedIn, Twitter, Canva to make graphics for social media, various sort of things like that on that sort of level. So some of that delivery is in partnership with Middlesbrough Libraries. I've got sessions already booked in Martin and Acklam Libraries, and that's all fully funded. So it's enabled me to actually do my dream, I suppose, of bringing those skills to people who are excluded by a commercial offer. So that's set me on a good footing. I'm also now doing some commercial work. This is the first month I'm going to be paying myself a salary, so we can get a little glass of champagne to that.
But it is like a really good point, especially for people who bring up like start enterprises who like, you know, want to be helping people and things like that. Like we've done it in the past, and a friend once gave me a piece of advice that I thought was a little bit harsh, but he said these guys don't care if you go out of business. Yep. He said they will love the help and they will gladly get it, but if they put you out of business because of the free help, they won't lose sleep over it.
Exactly.
And when you've got mortgages and a family and stuff like that, you've sometimes got to kind of like start to make like forward planning decisions, like, you know, you've done. And thankfully I think there's some, like, you know, yourself and some of the people who are very talented who can make, and hardworking who can make the best of both worlds, which is like quite a hard like keep swapping over. And the balance of wanting help versus money is, unfortunately, I think everybody's kind of been not conditioned, but maybe the thought that those are two very separate things, where they probably aren't really, you know what I mean? Like some of the enterprises that do the most need funding from somewhere. Libraries need, like you said, we'd be in a very sorry space without councils. I know we all moan at them, but if the councils went tomorrow, right, okay, there's no funding available for it anymore, we're shutting everything, it'd be anarchy the day after. Like, you know, we don't realise kind of like the services that they provide, you know. Even, never mind on a community level, but just basically who's collecting the bins, you know, and things like that. So I imagine it is a really hard balance to keep.
Yeah, I mean, that's this type of the basic computer skills support certainly used to be something libraries were offering even 10 years ago. And it's interesting now. There is still funding for that, but it sort of has to come round backwards. You know, Loftus Library, for instance, has a beautiful computer suite. It's like really a big room. It's barely used for its original purpose, and there used to be, presumably, you know, I don't know for sure, there used to be staff that offered that sort of training, and I believe Stockton still is staffed for IT support, but it's unusual. But you know that it still exists. But yeah, I mean it's don't get me wrong, it's been an absolute pleasure working for the people I have helped, and I have made a difference to some businesses, and I don't think that any of those people consciously were taking advantage of me or thinking, not, as you say, not caring whether I'm going out of business. I don't think it's something that would cross their minds, and it was a pleasure to help them. But when I go home and look at my numbers, I can't be spending so much time. It just doesn't add up.
Of course, and it's not like that those people are, maliciously thinking, oh, well, we'll get another hour of our time or another hour of time. It's just the fact that they want help, and they're probably giving everything that they can to help. But it's just like you say, it's like if you return, I'm sorry, I can't help you anymore. They're not going to have sleepless nights of, oh my God, I put that woman out of business. How's she going to pay a mortgage? Where you most definitely would have those sleepless nights.
And the other thing is whether putting a value on my skills, and that's something I've heard a lot from business advisors across the months. Don't undervalue your skills, and it's something I've always sort of fought against because. Yeah, okay, but how do I get those skills to these people that I can't reach otherwise? And that's been I think I've reached the point where I have to accept I can't run the business I dreamed that I would be able to run just because it just doesn't add up, and I've had to accept emotionally that it's not my problem. It sounds awful. I hate saying it, but it isn't my problem if they can't afford. Digital marketing help. Yeah,
and you've kind of got like you say, you're doing it. It's not that you've made an all-out decision to do one and not the other. You're still doing, and it's a great split.
That's
like
right.
Like this podcast. As me as a business owner, costs me a lot of money to run, but it's not a non-profit or anything.
Well, there's value
like
added,
Of course, there is massively to the business, and there's no doubt about that. And I would never.
So I've managed to get myself a little space now to work with some of the community groups I've wanted to work with. So I'm talking to a parent carer forum, for instance, at the moment about making them a website, and so I'm able to offer them a rate which and. It's identifying who's deserving. I don't really want to have to think that way, but I look at community groups, and if I can give some of my time to those, then I've achieved what I set out to achieve.
Because I'm sure that there is a massive filtering, not a filtering down effect, but that may be the wrong term. But is it kind of the community groups that you're looking to work with more? Is it a bit more of are you looking to work with more people on the commercial side that will allow you
absolutely
the freedom of start doing the more? And I imagine it is more reward. I imagine it is very rewarding work to be able to help these people.
I think so, and I think it is as I move forward with this approach, I think, and it is almost valuing my skills as well. I do have something to offer in the market, and I think a larger SME or small and medium sized business in the region who might well feel motivated to give something back and work with a social enterprise, where I'm talking to a digital marketer here, but if giving something back, and it's what's the word, social responsibility, for a company, I have the specific offer that if somebody goes with me for some social media work, for instance, some of that profit is going to go back into the community and helping our, Teesside and North Yorkshire, basically. So I live in Yarm, so I sort of cover that sort of geographical area. It's being reinvested locally to help communities.
And there is, especially in Teesside, we've had people on who've run charities, etc., and there is a great push in money wanting to be able not stay in Teesside, but the companies want to help people of Teesside, so doing stuff like that's absolutely phenomenal.
So I offer a certificate now, for instance, if I have a commercial customer. You get a certificate that you can use as your corporate social responsibility in terms of you working with a non-profit social enterprise for your marketing. That money is going back into our local communities. So I'm looking at the future and as well now. I mean, in terms of my own sort of working week, I've got to scale back some of what I've been doing. I never sit down, and I never stop moving. I'm always delivering some training session or other, or a mentoring day, or and it is exhausting, frankly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And there's only me at the moment, and so I have sort of come to this crossroads a little bit, and want to look after myself a little better. I have a new project as well in the pipeline, which I'm going to look at crowdfunding. Okay. Which is a co-working space in Yarm.
All right. Okay.
Now there's co-working spaces dotted about the area already, and I've worked in some of them myself, and I've been quite close, because I live in Yarm, I've been quite closely involved with the Yarm Business Forum, which is a group of local businesses trying to reinvigorate the high street. You know, high streets are struggling at the moment. A lot of my clients for social media work has been high street businesses who, you know, like things like boutiques or independent shops who have always sort of trundled along until now, and now they're finding, oh, we need an online shop, or we need to do a push on Instagram, and we don't know what we're doing. And that's been quite a lot of my sort of micro business work has been high street businesses. And I saw an opportunity, I think, for a workspace which would help not only the sort of retail businesses, but then I think that workspace could help some of the other micro startups that I'm wanting to reach in terms of an office space. And at the same time, that would tick my original vision of having a neurodiverse friendly sort of adapted workspace where there was a quiet zone and the lighting was right. And so that would be a lovely way for me to tick that box without having, before I get my premises with my team, you know.
But that's a great, like, you know, way to do it. Like, again, it comes back to that, like, thinking outside the box of, like, finding of, like, we're going to go from A to B, and you've got to go from A to C to D, then back to B, and then back where you're meant to be. So it's in the startup phase at the moment. I'm making some initial inquiries about funding, about a space, talking to some agents about offices and possible how it could work. I'm looking at the access methods as well, because it would have to be an electronic pass. You know, there's various complicated things that are coming up. Is the lease going to work for? Because this model is relatively new, but I think the co-working model is in massive growth at the moment, across the country and across the world, in fact. And I think Yarm is such a lovely town to be beautiful. In. That, absolutely.
I think some people might go for having a little office or a hot desk, or even just using meeting room space. So that is what I'm looking at seriously at the moment. So my plan for the crowdfunder, which will be launched in the next few weeks, is to invite people to sort of get first come first served desk space and at a reduced rate. So that will enable me to cover some of my startup costs and then sort of go from there. So it's a little bit of an experiment, but I think that somebody like me, you know, back to when I suppose doing a PhD is an entrepreneurial endeavour to some extent. You strike out on writing an enormous thing. It was 80,000 words, I think it was. It was on Renaissance sculpture and Renaissance and Baroque sculpture and feminism. So it was a massive project, but I don't shy away from a big project.
No.
So starting my charity in France, for instance, it was actually for bilingual children to learn to write in English. So English families living out in the south of France. Researched the whole thing from scratch. Got premises, we got teachers, we had staff and volunteers. So it was, you know, from nothing, and I'm still proud of that. And I think I've always had the instinct to the things which are my strengths. I want to have communities and people benefit from those things and share those strengths. So yes, I think that's sort of where I'm going from here, is very much thanks to the Good Things Foundation to enable me to reach those people I want to reach, and my first sort of commercial market clients helping me to subsidise the work for those little charities. It is starting to sort of come together, and now my co-working space project, I'm hoping, is going to be the infrastructure that will enable me to have a working week that's healthy, and I will benefit from that, but then other people will benefit from that too.
I think it's a phenomenal idea. If there's any way we can support or get awareness out or anything like that through the podcast, please let us know. It's something we'd love to support. Okay, so one thing that we like to ask every person when they come on the podcast is the same 3 questions.
Okay.
That you might be seeing, obviously, if you've seen one of our previous podcasts, we do try and catch people unawares, but
I haven't heard to the end of one. So.
All right, okay. All right, then. It's always... all right, so we're still good. It doesn't matter if people know them. So the 3 questions in order, as I'll let you know them first and then go, is the first is, what does your own idea of success look like? We've had a million different answers for this, and I do love asking it. We've had people who've said for better work-life balance, with people said who they want to spend more time with the children, with people who said when my business is this big, when I've got this much in the bank. There's literally been every answer like on the scale, which is why we ask it, because there is no one way of doing it. The second thing is, have you ever had a failure, or at the time was perceived as a failure or a setback, that later led to success or pointing you on the path to success? Just purely because we ask that, because there's that many people, especially when starting up business and things like that, things happen that just seem absolutely the end of the world, but actually when you look back on them, think, oh well, that's actually pointed me down this path that I would have never got otherwise. And then the third thing is one thing that you are incredibly into or obsessed with at the moment. And we've had so many great answers for that, from TV shows to gadgets. We've had people who've come in who were going to purchase new equipment for their business. Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchins is apparently obsessed with automation, like Google Alexa and all that kind of stuff. Intriguing. And he was like, he's really gone down the rabbit hole, stuff like that. So we've had like so many great answers. It's always fun to ask them. So we'll start with the first one of what does success look like to you? I think currently, shall I say? Yes,
it is a really good question. To me, I'm very much a big picture thinker, which can be a little unexpected, because for autism you tend to think, oh, it's all about detail, but I tend to flip it around and I see the big picture. And work is such a massive part of your life. What I want to get to is in looking forward to every working day and being engrossed, and it's something like the flow state, when you're in a flow state and you're just absorbed and happy in your work. And if I can get to the point where my work life is satisfying, financial security is clearly part of that, because if you're not financially secure, that's not a satisfying work day.
Of course.
And it's just part of it. But yes, it's very much the experience for me, as if I'm looking forward to every day. That would be the definition of success.
That's phenomenal. And have you ever had a failure, or I hate the term failure because it sounds so, or at the time was perceived as a failure or a setback that later led to, or put you on the path to something great?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is when I was running my charity in France, because it was a volunteer committee. It was a non-profit association, so I wasn't paid for my role. The committee weren't paid for our roles, but we did masses of work. The staff were paid, and the fees of the children who attended the classes were what enabled the cash flow to go around. A couple of sort of 18 months in, we had a disagreement with one of the board members, one of the trustees, I suppose, of the on the committee, and who had started a profit-making business that was directly competing with the charity that she was still a trustee of. Okay. And it was a bit of a nightmare. It started off like she was handing out flyers at one of our charity events. Great. To one of her things that was profit-making, and it was on the same day as one of our workshops in the summer, to this captive audience of expat Brits, which was a difficult market. And she was a trustee, and I didn't have anything against someone starting a business. On the contrary, it's great. The more stuff there is available for families, the better. But you can't be on the committee at the same time. Not having the contact details of the parents, knowing everything about what we're planning, and it ended up dividing the community. Almost pretty much the entire expat community of that area, within about an hour distance, was our sort of community, who sided with one side or the other, and it became a very much pitched battle at the time between people who disagreed. I mean, my position, and with hindsight, autism does make you black and white, and it makes and right and wrong is very important. Yeah. And I was convinced this was wrong and that she couldn't continue to do it, and I pushed that right until the end. I lost friendships. I lost her friendship. She was a good friend, and I've sort of always been sad about that. It did cement other friendships. Some people stuck by me absolutely loyally, which taught me a lot. Yeah. And in the end, we did have to sort of eject her from the committee in the most unpleasant way possible. I had a newborn at the time as well. It was emotionally, it was tremendously difficult, and the repercussions of that. This is now 9 years ago, but the repercussions still exist. The two organisations in France still exist, half an hour away from each other, offering the same thing. One kind of profit making, and one is the charity still runs. But I think what it taught me, I was literally raw. I'd come out of my PhD. I'd never been in a workplace. I'd certainly never managed anyone. I'd never been on a committee of any kind. And it taught me so much about staff management, team management, the mentality of volunteering as well, because volunteers are tremendously passionate and personally invested, which I think that was a salutary lesson in how much, I was conceiving it as almost a professional thing. This is the right and wrong. And it wasn't about that. It was about everyone's personal investment. And in a voluntary project, that was inevitable. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire of leadership, organisational leadership, management, which since then I've gone on to manage staff at the library service. I was a line manager. But the lessons I learnt from that, pretty much, I don't want to call it a disaster because both organisations did survive it.
Yeah.
But I think that was life-changing sort of.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And what is one thing that you are either obsessed with or really into? Obsessed is another word that kind of,
Yeah. I don't know. It's I think two things sort of come to mind. One is like in the back of my mind for all my life. I've and I'm now going to commit to start again is music. So I play the violin and viola, and I have neglected it for so long. And I've tried to get back into it. There's always something else more important. It's either the kids or it's my work or I don't know. And in September I am committing. It's in my diary. I'm going to join the Cobweb Orchestra in Billingham, which is run by Peter Gulbis, who he's a violin teacher that teaches in all the local schools. Teaches my daughter violin, who's 10 has started, and I'm committing to that. So it's at the moment I'm just I'm doing something for myself. It's something I've always loved and I've neglected for 20 years. I'm going to do it. So there's that. The other thing that I'm enjoying at the moment is I'm introducing my partner Matthew to Star Trek The Next Generation.
I'm a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation.
Excellent. So. He had never watched it before, which I don't understand how you could grow up without Star Trek. At 6 p.m. on BBC Two.
Yeah.
So we're halfway through season 5, I think, at the moment.
I don't even know how many seasons there are, to be honest.
I think it's probably 8, I think. But I'm not a complete.
They're doing a new movie, aren't they? Picard.
There's a Picard series.
I haven't seen the trailer. I've only seen it, but I remember.
Yes, you've got to keep your eye on that.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm not a complete. I don't know all the episode names and everything. I've never been quite that kind of fan, but I'm very much an emotional fan.
Yeah.
I grew up with Star Trek: The Next Generation, and those values have stayed with me. So it's. Yes, we're looking forward to the episode. Our next episode we're due to watch is the one where Riker discovers that a copy of him was made and abandoned on a planet, and then they find the copy of Riker who's still in love with Troy. And so that's the next one. So I'm all over that.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. That's such a good answer. Right, thank you so much for coming down and talking to us. It's been great to have a chat with you. We'll make sure that everything for Green Tree, etc., is shared below. All the links to all those contacts. So if anybody does want to get in contact, please click on any of the links below. Everything will be there, and we'll obviously anything that you need for us to do for the other project and things like that. Please let us know. We're always
Thank you very much.
This has been the Teesside Business Podcast. The Teesside Business Podcast is promoted and produced by Person to Person Marketing. Thanks very much for listening.